Thanks for clicking. China Evergrande's debt crisis reached an interesting point this week as international creditors, frustrated with the lack of progress, submitted their own restructuring plan for the distressed developer. And there's good reason for these creditors to be worried, as it was announced this week that the ongoing mortgage boycotts and continual defaults on the part of China's real estate developers have started to make their way into Chinese banks, with a major increase in non-performing loans.
I am truly sorry.
And the property crisis isn't getting any better either, as it was also announced this week that Country Garden, China's largest real estate developer, saw its profit drop by 96%, as the company announced the real estate sector had entered into a severe depression. So what I want to do today is briefly go over the proposal offered by Evergrande's international creditors, tongue-in-cheek as it is, and then I want to discuss some of the data coming from Chinese banks, as one of the real worries of this real estate crisis was always that it would hit the banks, which can cripple an economy. And then I want to briefly touch on Country Garden's losses. As we'll see in a minute, the real estate crisis in China is continuing to heat up. It will no doubt be hurt even more by the recent announcement that 20 million people are entering into a new lockdown. We'll continue to have updates out on China's real estate crisis on this channel every Friday. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click like and subscribe. But for now, let's get into Evergrande. Evergrande's international creditors, frustrated with its lack of progress for submitting its own restructuring plan, submitted their own restructuring plan this week, demanding that Evergrande's chair pay Evergrande's debts with his own funds. The plan from these creditors comes as Evergrande failed to submit its own restructuring plan by the end of July deadline to meet its $300 billion in liabilities. The plan by these creditors suggested that Evergrande chair Hui Ka Yan, I'm sorry I butchered that probably, purchase additional shares of Evergrande and then Evergrande use that money to pay its international obligations.
And they all thought it was funny.
While the news outlets have not commented on this being a tongue-in-cheek proposal, with the chances of this being accepted by Evergrande shareholders, or by Beijing for that matter, being at about zero, I think the proposal was a gesture of frustration on behalf of these international creditors, with Evergrande's lack of progress in submitting their restructuring plan. We spoke back in December about Beijing forcing Evergrande's founder to sell some of his shares in order to shore up his finances. And it's unlikely that Beijing will allow him to buy those shares back just to pay back international creditors.
That's not going to happen.
Especially when Beijing has been adamant that domestic creditors will be favored over that of international ones. So all in all, I do think this was a gesture of frustration on the part of international creditors, but does demonstrate that frustration is growing on China's lack of progress with this real estate crisis, which, with the crisis spreading to China's banks, domestic creditors are going to need all the help they can get. Data is starting to come out from China showing that with these developers not paying their debts, and with these mortgage boycotts ongoing, these bad loans, these non-performing loans are starting to add up on the books of China's banks. Postal Savings Bank of China released data this week showing that NPLs, non-performing loans, had hit 1.79 billion yuan, an 82-fold increase in the number of non-performing loans on their books since December. The Agricultural Bank of China, AG Bank, reported $178 million in non-performing loans in bad loans, stemming in large part from the mortgage boycotts and unfinished projects.
It faces 1.23 billion yuan. It's $178 million in overdue loans from those mortgage boycotts on unfinished projects. That's nearly double its previous estimate.
But it's not just the boycotts which are causing these bad loans, these NPLs, to show up on China's books. China's Merchant Bank reported a 22.79 billion yuan loss in the first 6 months, a 58% drop from a year ago, mainly due to undisclosed real estate customers, meaning Chinese real estate developers that have failed to pay their debts. A 58% increase in the number of bad loans in just over a year, and that's on this bank alone. So the non-performing loans, the NPLs, are starting to add up. Bloomberg tallied that the total amount of NPLs in China's banking system hit a record of 2.95 trillion won in China, the highest the country has ever seen. And that was just by June. The mortgage boycotts continued to speed up in July, and we saw hundreds of thousands of borrowers fail to make their mortgage payments, or rather refuse to make their mortgage payments. And that data has yet to show up on China's books. So it's more than likely that when we do get this data for July, for August, we're going to see even more non-performing loans on behalf of China's banking sector as this crisis continues to spread, as the contagion from the real estate crisis moves into the banking sector, which was always one of the biggest worries when this crisis started. And it's little wonder why this crisis has spread to the banks. When we look at Country Garden, China's largest real estate developer, just reported this week a 96% drop in its profit in just over a year. This was the lowest amount of profit on record for Country Garden. And given that Country Garden is China's biggest real estate developer and that they've seen a 96% drop in their profit, this underscores a continued weakness of the real estate sector and shows a sector that is not getting better anytime soon. So all in all, not a great week for China's property crisis, with Evergrande's creditors getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress, more and more evidence that this crisis is spreading to the banks. And finally, China's biggest developer, Country Garden, which was once considered safe, is reporting a major reduction in its profit, a 96% reduction. That's massive for any company to see a 96% drop in the amount of money they bring in. So, all in all, things are not looking up in China, which, as we've talked about before on this channel, is not great for the rest of the world, for Canada's economy, for the economy of the United States. What happens in China will reverberate here in Canada, and as such, we will continue to have updates out on this property crisis on this channel every Friday. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click like and subscribe. But for now, thanks so much for watching.